Hey, it's Chuck from IndyCar Ministry, and we're going to do something a little different this week for Wednesday Wisdom. Rather than focusing on one verse of the Bible, we're going to talk about the whole thing. You see, one of the biggest things people talk to me about is their struggle to understand their Bible when reading it, and how they just can't connect. And one of the good reasons for that here in America is because the Bible was written originally in languages like Aramaic, Greek, and Hebrew. And I don't know about you, but I don't speak or read any of those languages. So I have to depend on what's called a Bible translation. And there's so many different translations out there that people often get lost in all the different variations and don't really understand them. Most Bibles are known by an acronym made out of their first letters, like a ESV, a NLT, a NIRV. And people really don't take time to figure out what all that means and how it affects their reading. A lot of times when people first come to Christ, they'll say, oh, I want to go get a Bible and start reading it. And they'll go and buy what's called a New King James Version, which is often very difficult to understand because the verbiage they use in there was written long ago for a time when people spoke differently. So Bibles today are translated different ways. Some are translated word for word, which is more like a King James or a ESV, English Standard Version. And they're translated on the literal word that was written down in the original Bible. Other Bibles are translated more thought for thought. Thought for thought means they're taking the general concept that was being talked about and making it more relatable to our times. Some versions that are examples of this are like an NLT or an NIRV, which is a New International Reader's Version. A great example of this kind of Bible is the Message Bible. It's very thought-based. It conveys the feelings of the original text. But if you read it word for word, it certainly doesn't even come close to what was originally written if you look at the individual words. Now, each of these Bibles has their place. You can be further along in your walk and need to read something that's a more literal translation of the words, like a King James or a ESV, but most people, when they're just getting started, would do fine with a thought-for-thought translation, because after all, the Bible is there to speak to our hearts. God's Word is living and active. That means you don't just read the Bible cover to cover and say, oh, I got it. Every time you read the Bible, you'll get something a little different out of it, because it has to do with where you're at in life and what the Spirit needs to teach you. So don't necessarily start at the beginning of the book and read it to the end and say, oh, I got it. I like to think of the Bible kind of like the Star Wars movies. For those of us who are old enough to know, we got to see the ending first. The original movies came out, I think it was 4, 5, and 6, and that was our Star Wars. Well, in the Bible, I would equate that to the New Testament, what they call the gospel, the good news. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's a great place to start in your reading. John is very often recommended when people are new to the Bible, because that way we learn about Jesus and how God's grace affects each and every one of us. Now, when we go back and read the Old Testament, starting in the beginning, that's more history and why things came to be the way they are, why those changes were made by God between what we call the law and grace, and all stuff we can get into deeper later. But what I'm getting at is it's important to find a Bible we can understand, take our time when reading it, and don't just look at the words in the text. Listen to what it's telling our hearts, both about God and ourselves. I'm out of time here for this segment, but I want you to go in the comments and tell me maybe what Bible translation you use, what one speaks to you the best, and maybe encourage a new believer in a way that you found that you can really spend time and connect in God's Word. We'll see you next time.